Hi, this is Simon Obstall. In this tutorial for Motion 5, we're going to be looking at creating this sort of rain effect. And you can see there's a fair bit to it. So we've got this reflection, we've got these ripples, proper photorealistic type splashes. And so it's some interesting techniques here that I hope you'll find useful. So we're not actually going to be creating this scene, but we're going to be creating a rainy street in downtown Tokyo, and it's going to look something like this. So let's begin by checking on our project settings: 1920 1080, 24 frames a second, and 10 seconds long. So I'm going to begin by importing my background image. Now I'm using this very nice shot of a Tokyo side street from Alexander Pasarich via pexels.com. Go and check out his lovely work there. I'm not going to put a link to this in the comments, but you can go and find either this image or you could use an image of your own. Now, the reason I've chosen something like this is because this effect works best if you've got lots of nice kind of lighting contrast. So we've got this dark sky and these very bright signs and lots of fun colours and so on. So that it's just going to make the whole thing look much more interesting if we've got that kind of lighting effect. So I'm going to scale this up to 210. And then I'm going to move it back 1000 pixels on Z. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new group and I'm going to import the texture called 4K Floor. Now this, I'm going to put links to all of these elements apart from the Alexander image into the comments. So there's my floor. I'm going to set its scale to 50%. And then what I want to do is open up the rotation, have a rotation, X rotation of -90, then a Y position of -100, and a Z position of +1000. That's my floor. And next I'm going to take my background image and duplicate that group. So right click duplicate, and I'm going to move that to the top above my floor. I'm going to take the image and I'm going to rotate it through 180 degrees because this is going to be our reflection. Now we need something to mask it so that it appears just in the area of the floor. And to do that, we're going to make yet another group. Command Shift N, or you can go to Object New Group. So I'm going to import the thing called Puddle Mat. Looks like this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move the anchor point of this. I'm coming down to the bottom here, select the anchor point tool, turn on the overlays. Just want to move the anchor point to the top of the frame like that. So that's actually going to be 2000 pixels. So the top of the frame like that. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust its Y position, -100, because I'm trying to line it up with my floor. So -100 on Y, +1000 on Z, and we need to rotate it through -90 on X. And then we can use that to mask our reflection. So I'm going to take this group that's got the reflection in it. I'm going to add an image mask. I'm going to take the group that's got the puddle mat in it, add it to the source well, and switch to luminance. And now you'll see we've got the reflection in that kind of puddle area there. So I've just taken a little bit of time out to label my groups here: background for that background image, floor for the floor image, and reflection for this foreground group with the reflection in it, and mat obviously for the puddle mat itself. So then what I want to do is let's add some rain. I'm going to make another new group, Command Shift N, and I'm going to import the element called rain render. Looks like this. Now this is an H.264 and it's therefore got no transparency, so I'm going to select screen for the blend mode. And now we've got rain falling like this. we might feel that that rain is a bit too heavy looking, so I'm going to come to Color Levels, and you'll notice that if I just adjust that black value, I can thin the rain out a bit, like that, just so it's a little bit less crude. I can brighten it up, of course, by adjusting the white value as well. So I'm going to leave it somewhere around there. So I've called that group Rain. I'm going to close it up. And now let's look at creating these all-important splashes in the water, because obviously without splashes, we just know that this rain is not actually interacting with our scene. So we're going to make yet another new group. So Command-Shift-N, and I'm going to import the element called Simple Splash. Bring that in. So Simple Splash looks like this. It's just two concentric circles and a dot in the middle. And it's not very scientific, but it will do the job for this. I'm not going to explain how to do it in this tutorial, but I might do a follow-up in which I explain how I've created some of these secondary elements for this project. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to take that Simple Splash and we're going to make particles. In other words, create an emitter. Now, obviously, there's no transparency here, and I need to hit the Additive Blend button there. I'm also going to, while I'm at it, turn off random frames, because we want them all to be proceeding like so. I'm going to reduce the speed down to 0, because we don't want these to move. Puddles don't sort of slide around, they just stay in place. And let's increase the birth rate to 500. Then what I'm going to do is change the shape to rectangle, the arrangement to random fill. Let's adjust the size. So I'm going to have 2000 by 4000. And then I'm going to come to Properties and rotate it through 90 degrees on X. And as before, I'm going to bring it down 100 pixels on Y and forward 1000 pixels on Z. So again, it's lining up with my floor, hopefully. So let's make a few adjustments to this. Come back to the emitter. I want to set it to 3D. Then I want to come back to my Simple Splash element and reduce the scale down to 20. And rotate it through -90 on X. So now we've got a whole field of puddles, splashes, whatever we want to call them, rippling splashes. And what we'll need to do is we'll need to add to this group, add object generators color solid, turn it black, and move it to the back of the group. So now we've got something that looks like this, and we will come to the group. Important to turn on fixed resolution like so. And we can turn this off. So I've labeled that group Ripple Displace because we're going to be using it to displace the reflection. So in order to do that, we are going to come down to our reflection group. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new group inside this. And so Command-Shift-N, and I'm going to put my background or my reflection layer into that. And to this group here, I'm going to apply filters, distortion, bump map. And I'm going to grab that Ripple Displace group and add it to the bump map source well like that. And now I think you can see we've got these splashing puddles. If I turn that on and off, nothing. And splashes, ripples. Need to get my terminology right. So I'm going to call these ripples. And that's looking pretty good. I might just increase let's increase the number of ripples, I think. So come back to the emitter. Let's maybe go for 750 instead. Yes, let's exaggerate it. So that's quite good. So if we come back to the bump map, we can increase the intensity of that. So if we wanted to really exaggerate it, we could go for 1. I think probably somewhere around 0.4, maybe even 0.3 is enough. We just don't want to over-exaggerate this. I think that looks fairly natural. So I'm going to add an extra form of displacement. At the moment, all we've got is these puddles that are just lying flat on the surface. But when the drops hit, what they'll actually do is they'll send up little droplets, which then fall back down to the surface. So to create those droplets, I'm going to make a duplicate of this ripple displace group. So duplicate that. And I've called that splash displace. So I'm going to open up that group and I'm going to add into it a new element. And this one is going to be called drop splash small, like this. Now drop splash small is very, very small. So I'm going to have to zoom in to show you what it looks like. Again, I'm not going to show you in this tutorial how I've made it. I might do that in a follow-up. So a little bit of particles, a little bit of edge collision as the droplets hit the floor kind of thing. Zoom back out again. So we're going to use this as the particle source for the emitter instead of the simple splash. So I'm going to drag that over the particle source there, particle cell, I should say, like so. I can delete that simple splash copy. Let's isolate this group and see what it looks like. So we've got these splash elements. So it's a little bit big, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to that drop splash small, and I'm going to reduce that scale, I think, down to around 50. Well, precisely 50. And then I'm going to set this group temporarily to add so we can see how it's working in relation to our other displace. So I'm going to turn that ripple displace on. And you can see that they're not quite matching up. And that's because of the slight mismatch in scale between the two elements. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just adjust that Y position to -86. And now I think you can see they're all emitting from the center of those circular ripples. And we're back in sync, as it were. So let's turn off that. Let's turn this one off as well. We don't need to see that. And we're going to add another bump map. So I'm going to make another group for this. It doesn't work if we add bump map filters to the same group. So we need to add each one to a separate group. So I'm going to make a new group, and I'm going to drag these into it. And I'm going to apply distortion bump map to this new enclosing group. And I'm going to use splash displace as the source. And I'm going to turn the amount up to 1. And we'll need to sort of zoom in to see exactly how this is working. But you can see here, for example, if I just step through, you can see we've got this really quite realistic looking splash effect, because we've got these droplets that are reflecting the environment exactly as they would do in real life. But we're not colouring the background. We're actually displacing it and using the kind of ambient light of the scene to create shiny droplets. That's not too bad. I've exaggerated those droplets. You'd probably make them a little bit smaller, I think, but I've exaggerated for the purposes of this tutorial. Just bear in mind that if you adjust the scale, you'll need to compensate by adjusting the position of that emitter just so they line up in the way that I showed you earlier on. But I'm not done yet with the displacement effect. I'm going to make yet another new group. And what I want to do here is, you'll probably notice that the surface, apart from where the splashes are happening, is completely mirror-like. It's got no displacement, no movement in it at all. And that's not very realistic. The water's been disturbed, so therefore it would get some ripples. You know, there's probably some wind or whatever that would be causing the surface of the water not to be completely smooth. So let's look at that. As I say, I've made a new group here. I'm going to add object generators noise, and then I'm going to rotate it through -90. Again, I want to position this where the floor is, so -100 on Y position, +100 on Z position, and I'm going to scale it to 165. So it's more or less covering the floor area like that. Now, by default, the noise generator doesn't have any animation, so I'm going to add some using stylize, crystallize. Let's set the size down to the minimum, which is 0.3, and let's have a speed, I think, of 0.2. We want just a gentle rippling effect. That looks like this. So we will also need to add the black solid to this. So I'm going to just grab it from one of these other groups. There we are. Hold down the Alt or Option key, drag it into this new group, move the color solid to the back. So I've renamed that group Waves Displace, and now let's look at applying it to our reflection puddle. So we want to make another new group, and I think what we want to do is probably have the waves as the base layer. So I'll come down to my original image and then make a new group just above that, put it into there, and we'll apply this to this bottom group. So filters, distortion, bump map, and grab that waves displace, add it to the bump map source like that. It's not displacing, and that's because I made a mistake and I didn't turn on fixed resolution. So you'll see as I do that, that's now working. And we can adjust this bump map. Let's turn off the other two while we have a look at this. You can see we've got this nice naturalistic rippling effect that's got correct perspective in relation to the scene. You know, we can increase it, but I mean that actually looks quite realistic if we're assuming there's lots of rain, but it's going to disguise our nice puddle action too much. So I'm just going to keep it low, somewhere like 0.1 is enough, I think, just for the purposes of this. Turn on my ripple splashes over the top of that, and then turn on the vertical splashes as well. Now our scene is looking a little bit odd because we're obviously not looking at the floor in the street level in our background image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the impression that we're on an elevated walkway. And to do that, I'm going to add in some sort of bridge structure at the back here, and I'm going to also add it into the front. So to do that, I'm going to come to that floor group. Let's close up that reflection for the time being to make ourselves a bit of space. Come to the floor group, and I'm going to import the element called girder. And it looks like that. And I'm going to come to Object, Replicate. Let's set the shape to line, have a start point of -2000, end point of +2000, and let's have 6 points. And then come to its scale, and let's reduce that down to 50%. And then we can just move it up like so. So it's just sitting just there on the back of our scene. Let's maybe go for 120, looks probably about right. Now, a couple of things are wrong about this. One of which is that we can't see it in our reflection. So I'm going to just again adjust the anchor point of this element so that it's sitting on the bottom there, like that. And then I'm going to take that and I'm going to duplicate it. So right click, duplicate, and I'm going to add it into that reflection group right at the bottom there, along with my main image. So just drag that into there. And then what we need to do is we need to rotate it through 180 on X. So now you can see we've actually got the bridge structure reflected in the puddle, and it's being displaced along with everything else in a photorealistic fashion. So that's good. I also want to create the effect of a shadow of this structure running across the walkway. So I'm going to take the replicator in the floor group there and duplicate it. And I'm going to come to Properties, and I'm going to rotate it through +90 on X. And then I'm going to scale it up on Y quite a bit, like so, all the way to the bottom of our frame like that. I'm going to come to Filters, Color, Levels. Let's grab that whiteout value and reduce it down quite a bit like that. And then we just need to blur it. So filters, blur, Gaussian blur. Let's have an amount of 150. And we might also want to just change the blend mode of this to multiply, I think. So it's more convincing. Perhaps just reduce the opacity just a little bit. That'll do, I think. And one final thing I want to do with this is to bring it out as a foreground element, so we can track past it in the foreground. So I'm going to grab the version that is not blurred, so that's the original master version, and I'm going to drag it out just above the reflection group there to make a new group with it inside. And let's just move it towards us, somewhere around there. It's going to be about right. So I've called that foreground bridge element, but I'm just going to turn it off because I just want to address the puddle, which I've only just roughly laid out so far. So let's come to the matte, select the puddle matte element. I'm going to position it at 300 on Z and then scale it up on Y. I think I'm going to go for something like 45, maybe a little bit more, something like that, just so we're getting a larger puddle area. What have we got? Actually, 50 is probably going to do it. So we can do something interesting with this matte that will actually add to the realism of the scene. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a color levels. And I want you to look what happens if I adjust the black and white out values. So if I adjust the black, you can see that actually I've got some subtle reflection. So that's none. I've got some subtle reflection outside the puddle area, as though that area is wet, but it's not a deep puddle like the main puddle. And at the same time, I can adjust the white out to make my puddle a little bit more see-through. Don't want to do too much of that, but it kind of helps, I think. So if I turn that off, it's just adding a little bit to the realism, I think. Now, the other thing to notice is that we're not getting any splashes outside the puddle area. And that's not looking very convincing, because surely we should be seeing some of the interaction of the rain on the areas that are wet but not deep in water. And I think we can fix that by coming to our splash displace element there and turning it on and switching that blend mode to something like color dodge. And we've got too much at the back there. I'm going to fix that in a second. But you can see now that we've got this whole set of rather cool splashes outside the puddle area, but just creating the impression that the rain is also falling there. I turn that on and off. That's not looking quite right, but that is. Now, there's one thing that's gone wrong here, and I want to fix it while we're at it. And that's, if you'll notice that because of the nature of motion emitters, for the first second or so, there's no action happening. And we can fix that by selecting the emitters. We need to do this quite carefully because we need to have them in sync. So both of those, so I've command clicked those, and dragging them back on the mini timeline, dragging them back by, let's drag them back a good 40 frames or so, maybe even more. And then coming to the end of the timeline and hitting O to make sure they run for the full duration. And now we've got proper emission action happening right at the beginning. And what I also want to do is just adjust the Z position so that we're not having particles coming up above that floor line or appearing to. So the fix is to come into the emitter and set the height to 2000 pixels and set the Z position to 1500. And I need to do the same for both of those so they stay in sync. So 1500 on Z and an emitter height of 2000. And now that's looking rather better. So you'll notice that we've really slowed to a pitiful crawl at this point. And this is because we're running so many simultaneous particles and displacement and so on. But the big problem is what would happen if we added a camera. So I'm going to add a camera, and I'm going to switch to 3D. And all of a sudden, all of my displacement disappears. And that's because these groups can't be 3D. So you'll notice if I set the ripple displace back to 2D, that reappears. Same thing with the splash, same thing with the waves. We're back to normal. They'll work as 2D groups, but they won't work as 3D groups. However, we obviously want to have a camera in here because we just don't want a static scene. So how are we going to get around that? Well, the fact of the matter is that we're going to have to render out these displacement elements and bring them back in and use the rendered versions to act as the bump map sources. So first of all, I'm going to just quickly set up a camera move, and I'll be back in a second. So here's my camera move. I've had to turn off the bumps while I set it up because with everything running, it's really starting to create difficulties for me. So anyway, there you go. So I'm tracking across and pulling out a little bit on Z, but that should give us a nice feel, I think, once we've got the lighting in and so on. So let's just have a look at how we are going to create these rendered elements. So what we want to do is we want to solo these groups. So I'm going to solo the ripple displace first by alt-clicking on its view button, like so. But we also need to switch it to 3D so we get the benefit of the camera move. So you see that we've now got those ripples moving as they're being affected by the camera. And we can render that out, and that will be a usable displace map for our scene because we can keep it as 2D. So what we're going to do is we're going to come to the Share menu, Export Movie, and because this is just a basic black and white element, and we don't need anything fancy, I'm going to keep it as H.264 just for convenience, and then let's call this ripple render, and we're going to render that out. Let's make a new folder for this. Let's call it Displace Elements, and take a few seconds just to render that out. Won't take very long because it's not a very long sequence, not a very complicated element, but it's obviously going to save a lot of time and resources if we do it this way. So that's my ripple element done. Unsolo that by alt-clicking it again, and let's solo the splash element. And again, let's make sure to switch it to 3D so we get the camera move, and then come to Share, Export Movie, we'll call it Splash Render. Save that one out as well. Unsolo that, and solo the waves. Again, make sure to switch it to 3D so we get the camera move. Again, Share, Export Movie, call this Waves Render, and save it out. So we can unsolo that again. So we don't need to see any of these, but we do want to keep that nice splash element that's giving us our overlay of the splashes, so we can see splashes on the semi-wet area. Okay, and now we can make a new group at the top here, and we want this group to be 2D, obviously, as we've been saying. And what we're going to do is we're going to import these 3 displace elements like so. So let's call that group Displace Elements. And now we can just assign these individual elements to their appropriate displace elements. So I'm going to select the waves there and then use the waves render as the source. Turn that on. You can see those waves are happening now. I'm going to select this is the ripple, turn that on, and add the ripple render to the source. So now we've got the circular ripples. And finally, let's select the bump map for the splash, turn that on, and add the splash render to it. And now we've got everything happening. We've got decent performance because we've rendered those elements out, and everything's moving together with the camera as it should. And let's just come down and turn back on our foreground bridge elements, so we're seeing that as well. So there we are. Actually, I need that foreground bridge element to be right at the top, don't I? Well, not quite right at the top, but what I actually want right at the top is the rain. So move the rain right to the top and the bridge element just underneath it. And what I need to do with that rain is make sure it's not 3D, like so. So it sits in front of everything. And now what we can do is we can add a light, and it's already starting to look better, but what we need to do, of course, is we need to isolate the reflection and the background so they're not hit by the light. So let's select the reflection group and come to Properties, Lighting, and turn that off. And let's do the same thing with our background. Turn off the lighting. And what we can do, I think, to make this much more interesting looking is to add a nice glow. And I'm going to use the best glow you can get, which is Hawaii Super Glow. Add it to the background there. That's a little bit too strong. Let's increase the threshold to 0.75 and maybe reduce the amount down to about 0.5. But you can see how that's already starting to look much nicer because it's got that sort of hazy glow that you'd get with this sort of humid rain. And we can copy that onto the reflection element inside the reflection group. So Alt drag that onto there. So we've got the copy of it. And that's looking pretty cool, I think. So what we can also do is we can add some extra lights to make this a little bit more fun. So I'm going to duplicate that light. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab that color of that sign there and just maybe increase the intensity a bit. Quite a lot, in fact. Like so. So it feels like we're getting a little bit of that ambient light. And we could do, if we come over to this other side, we could maybe pick the color of this. Let's move that light over to that side. So we're getting that color over there. Let's duplicate it one more time. Let's move it over to the left-hand side. And let's pick this color here. Again, that's looking a lot nicer because we've got those colors that are derived from the scene, just making everything sort of sit together a little bit more convincingly. One small thing I've noticed is that because of some various operations, the shadow element has dropped down too low. So I'm going to set that to -99. So it's just sitting just above the actual floor. Don't know how it got to 105. All of a bit of a puzzle. But you can see that now that's actually acting as a proper shadow. And it just makes it more convincing. So that's about it. I think we will leave it for there. As I say, I might do a follow-up with some tips on how to create some of these elements, the displace elements and so on. So let's leave it there for now. Thanks very much for watching. See you again soon.